The restaurant had always been a quiet place during the afternoons. The kind of spot where the sound of the ceiling fan mixed with soft music playing from an old speaker. Most people came during the lunch rush, and once that wave passed, only a few customers stayed behind to sip tea or finish their meals slowly. The staff used this time to catch their breath, wipe down tables, and prepare for the evening. It was an ordinary day, calm and predictable, until the door opened and an elderly man stepped inside, bringing a strange kind of stillness with him. He wasn't loud, and he didn't look unusual at first glance. He wore a neatly pressed suit, not too fancy but clearly expensive. His hair was silver and carefully combed back. He carried a small leather notebook tucked under one arm and a worn-out messenger bag over his shoulder. What caught everyone's attention was the way he paused at the entrance, scanning the room like he was searching for something familiar. His eyes moved slowly across every table, every wall, every corner, as if he was taking notes in his mind. The manager, who never liked surprises, raised an eyebrow. He whispered to one of the cooks, wondering loudly why an elderly tourist would choose their simple place when expensive cafes were just down the street. The cook shrugged and returned to chopping vegetables. No one paid much attention after that. Customers came and went all the time, but the staff soon realized something different about this visitor. When the manager walked over and asked what he wanted to order, the elderly man looked confused. He bowed politely, smiling, and began speaking in Japanese. The manager froze, blinking fast. He didn't understand a single word. The man tried again, slower this time, but it didn't help. A couple of customers turned to watch, curious. A group sitting near the window whispered among themselves, guessing what might be going on. The manager sighed, embarrassed and annoyed. He tried pointing at the menu, raising his voice slightly as if volume could bridge the language gap. The elderly man nodded many times, but his expression showed he didn't really understand. He seemed nervous now, clutching his small notebook with both hands as if afraid he was causing trouble. One of the waiters suggested calling someone from outside who might know basic Japanese. Another said they could try using a translation app. But the manager wanted none of that. He didn't like complications during the quiet hours. He turned away from the elderly man with a frustrated sigh. At the far corner of the room, a young waitress had been wiping down the coffee machine. She heard everything. She didn't know much Japanese, but she had taken a short course months ago out of interest. She wasn't fluent, not even close, but she knew enough to help someone order a meal. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should step in. The manager didn't like when anyone acted without him asking. Still, something about the elderly man's gentle smile and lost expression made her move. She walked over quietly, offering a small bow of her own before speaking in simple Japanese. Her voice was calm, not too confident but warm enough to make the man relax. His eyes lit up instantly. He returned the bow and answered her in short, careful sentences. The customers who had been watching suddenly leaned in, whispering things like, "Oh, she knows Japanese?" And finally, someone can help him. The manager looked surprised and slightly upset that she stepped in, but he didn't interrupt. She listened to the elderly man patiently, nodding at every few words. Then she turned to the manager and explained softly that he wasn't confused at all. He was simply asking for recommendations on what meals were the most comforting and homemade. He wanted something warm and simple because he had just come from a long flight. He also wondered if the restaurant had any dishes similar to the food he grew up with. The manager blinked again, not expecting such a harmless request. He forced a smile and told her to offer him the lunch special and anything else she thought he might like. Then he walked off, pretending he had everything under control. The waitress returned her attention to the elderly man, taking his order carefully. He seemed relieved. His shoulders relaxed, and he finally sat down at a table near the center of the room. Instead of browsing his phone like most visitors did, he took out his leather notebook and placed it in front of him with gentle hands. He opened it slowly, revealing pages filled with neat handwriting, sketches of buildings, maps, and what looked like signatures of well-known business leaders. The waitress noticed the pages while pouring him water, but she didn't say anything. She didn't want to seem nosy. Still, she couldn't help but wonder why someone who had such important-looking things would walk into a small neighborhood restaurant instead of a fancy place. The elderly man caught her glance and gave a small smile, closing the notebook halfway, but not hiding it completely. Felt like he didn't mind if she had seen a little. As the kitchen prepared his meal, the elderly man watched everyone carefully. Not in a judgmental way, but as if he was studying their behavior. He observed how the staff talked to each other, how they treated customers, and how they reacted under pressure. Whenever someone raised their voice or frowned, he scribbled something in his notebook. Whenever someone helped another person or spoke kindly, he made a small mark in the margin. The staff didn't notice. They were busy moving around, cleaning tables and arranging utensils. But the waitress noticed his eyes following every motion. She couldn't tell whether he was just curious or if he was intentionally paying attention to every detail. She wondered if he was some kind of writer or maybe a retired professor traveling the world. The elderly man barely touched his phone the entire time. He seemed more interested in people than technology. When the waitress brought his food, he bowed again and thanked her in Japanese. She blushed slightly, not from embarrassment but from the sincerity in his voice. She didn't often meet people who expressed gratitude so deeply. He tasted the food slowly, closing his eyes after the first bite. He wrote something in his notebook again, this time smiling as he did. The waitress couldn't tell whether he liked the food or the atmosphere more, but she sensed he was enjoying himself. A couple of customers tried talking to him out of curiosity, but when they realized he didn't speak much English, they gave up quickly. One person even muttered that he should have gone somewhere else if he couldn't communicate. The elderly man heard the comment but didn't react. He simply kept eating calmly, with the same polite smile he'd had since he walked in. The waitress felt a small pang of sympathy. She knew what it felt like to be misunderstood or ignored. Maybe that was why she felt drawn to help him. It wasn't just her ability to speak a little Japanese. It was the feeling that no one deserved to be treated like a burden. She checked on him from time to time, making sure he had everything he needed. Each time she approached, he would look up with gratitude, as if her presence alone eased the tension in the room. When she asked if the food was all right, he responded with a soft laugh and nodded many times, then wrote another note in his book. The lunch hour slowly faded into the quiet part of the afternoon again. The restaurant emptied out until it was just a couple of regulars lingering over their drinks. The elderly man, however, didn't seem to be in a hurry. He finished his meal, then spent several minutes staring out the window, watching people pass by on the street. The waitress wondered if he was waiting for someone, maybe a family member or a business partner. But he didn't make any phone calls, and he never signaled anyone outside. He just stayed seated, almost as if the restaurant itself was part of something he needed to observe. When she went to collect his empty plate, he gently stopped her with a small gesture. He opened his notebook again and pointed at a line he had written earlier. The handwriting was beautiful but unfamiliar to her. She looked a little confused, and he smiled. Then he spoke slowly in Japanese, explaining that the line said something like, "A place may be simple, but its people reveal its worth." She didn't know how to respond at first. It wasn't something an ordinary tourist would say. Felt deeper, almost like a message meant for her. She bowed slightly, unsure of what else to do. The elderly man bowed back, then closed his notebook softly. And for a brief moment it felt like he knew more about this place, and maybe even about her, than anyone else had noticed in a long time. The young waitress didn't expect the elderly man to stay long after finishing his meal, but he remained seated at the same table, quietly flipping through the pages of his notebook. The restaurant had grown almost silent by then, with only the soft clinking of dishes from the kitchen and the low hum of the fan filling the air. Most customers had left, leaving behind empty chairs and sunlight stretching across the floor through the large windows. She kept glancing at him as she worked, curious about the notebook he carried everywhere. Every few minutes he made small notes or drew tiny symbols in the margins. It didn't look like casual doodling. It was the kind of writing someone did when they were recording thoughts that mattered. The more she watched, the more she wondered what exactly he was thinking about so seriously. But she didn't want to disturb him. She continued wiping tables, stacking plates, and clearing glasses. Still, her mind kept drifting back to him. How did a gentleman from another country end up alone in this small neighborhood restaurant? Why did he choose this place when there were plenty of modern cafes nearby? And why did he observe everything so closely, as if every small action carried meaning? The elderly man finally looked up from his notebook and gestured for her. She walked over quietly, a little unsure if she had done something wrong. But he smiled warmly and pointed to his cup. It was empty. She nodded quickly, realizing he wanted tea. In simple Japanese, he asked if she could bring something light, something calming. She smiled and brought him a warm cup of green tea, placing it gently on the table. He bowed again, this time even deeper than before. She was surprised by how respectful he was. Most customers barely looked up when she brought something to their table. But he treated every small gesture as something meaningful. She stepped back a little and let him enjoy his tea, but he motioned for her to stay for a moment. She hesitated, unsure if the manager would approve, but the elderly man seemed to only want to tell her something short. He spoke softly, thanking her again for helping him earlier. He said he felt at ease because she took time to understand him, even when no one else tried. His voice carried a sincerity that made her feel warm inside. She replied in simple Japanese, telling him it was no trouble at all. She didn't want to make it sound like she was doing anything special. She was only doing what she would want someone to do for her if she were far from home and unable to communicate. He laughed softly, as if her response reminded him of something or someone from his past. Then he returned to his notebook, his fingers moving gently across the pages. She stepped back again, but his presence stayed in her thoughts. A few minutes later, the door opened, and a couple of new customers walked in. The manager looked relieved to see fresh faces. He quickly directed the waitress to take their orders. She greeted them politely, but her mind was still half on the elderly man, wondering what story lay behind those carefully written notes. While she took care of the new customers, she noticed the elderly man glancing at her from time to time, not in a strange way, more like he was quietly studying how she interacted with people. He watched how she smiled at customers, how she listened, how she balanced multiple tasks without complaining. He wrote something after every small moment, as if these tiny details meant more to him than anyone realized. When the restaurant slowed down again, she returned to check on him. His cup was empty once more. Before she could ask if he wanted a refill, he opened his notebook and gently turned it so she could see one of the pages. It wasn't written in English, but she recognized certain words repeated on different lines, as if they were important. He pointed at a short sentence in Japanese and spoke slowly, so she could follow. He told her it meant something like, "A person's true nature appears in small actions." She wasn't sure why he was showing this to her, but it made her feel seen, almost as if he understood her without needing many words. She nodded politely, grateful for the message even if she didn't fully understand the reason behind it. He then closed the notebook softly, as if the moment itself was complete. But the moment didn't end there. The man began asking her simple questions about the restaurant. Not in a nosy way, more like someone who was genuinely interested in how things worked. He wanted to know how long she had been working there, whether the place had always been this peaceful, how the staff treated each other, and whether many tourists visited. She answered his questions as best as she could. She told him the restaurant had been there for years, owned by a family that valued simplicity more than competition. She explained that afternoons were always slow, and that most of the staff had been working together long enough to feel almost like distant relatives. He listened carefully, smiling often. When she finished speaking, he asked her one last question: how she managed to stay calm even when dealing with difficult customers or stressful situations. She looked a little embarrassed, unsure how to answer. She didn't think she was particularly calm. She just didn't like raising her voice or making people uncomfortable. She told him she believed that kindness made things easier for everyone, including herself. She didn't say it in a poetic or dramatic way. It was simply how she felt. He nodded slowly, almost as if her words confirmed something he had been thinking himself. Then he wrote another note in his book. During this time, The manager kept glancing at them suspiciously. He didn't like the waitress spending too long at one table. He finally called her over and quietly scolded her for wasting time. She apologized softly and explained that the elderly man had asked her a few questions. The manager shook his head but let it go. The elderly man watched the interaction from his seat. He scribbled something quickly in his notebook, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. When she returned to cleaning, she noticed the elderly man observing the manager now. His eyes followed the way the manager spoke to the staff, the way he directed orders, and how he reacted whenever something went slightly wrong. He took notes every time the manager raised his voice or looked annoyed. It almost felt like he wasn't just here to eat. He seemed to be evaluating the atmosphere, the people, and how they treated one another. Later in the afternoon, a small incident happened that caught the elderly man's attention even more. One of the cooks accidentally dropped a tray of utensils, causing a loud clatter. The manager immediately scolded him harshly, even though it was clearly an accident. The cook looked embarrassed, picking up the utensils as quickly as he could. Most customers ignored the moment, focusing on their food or conversations. But the elderly man watched the scene carefully, then wrote something in his notebook with slow, deliberate strokes. The waitress felt uncomfortable witnessing the cook get scolded, but she wasn't in a position to interfere. She noticed the elderly man looking at her afterward, almost as if he was trying to read her reaction. She didn't say anything, but he seemed to understand her discomfort anyway. As the hours passed, the elderly man remained calm and patient. He didn't complain once. He didn't rush the staff or demand special attention. He sat quietly, observing, sipping his tea and writing. It was as if he was gathering pieces of a puzzle, one small moment at a time. The waitress went about her tasks, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the elderly man was here for a reason bigger than a meal. Something about him felt important, though he acted humble and simple. She wondered if she should ask him more about his travels, but she didn't want to seem intrusive. Finally, when the afternoon sun began to fade and the shadows in the restaurant grew longer, the elderly man stood up slowly. He bowed to the waitress one last time, expressing thanks with genuine warmth. He placed a folded piece of paper beneath his empty cup, something she didn't notice until after he walked toward the door. He paused at the entrance and looked around the restaurant again, as if memorizing it. Then he stepped outside into the soft evening light, leaving behind the same quietness he had brought in with him. When the waitress returned to clear his table, she found the folded paper. She opened it carefully. Inside was a short note written in Japanese, but she recognized enough words to understand the meaning. It said something close to, "Thank you for your kindness. Not everyone sees the importance of it." She held the note gently, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. She didn't know who he truly was, but she sensed that this was only the beginning of something bigger, something she couldn't yet name. The next day began like any other. The restaurant opened early, and the staff moved around preparing for the morning crowd. Cups clinked softly, bread warmed in the oven, and sunlight slowly filled the room. Everything felt normal, yet the young waitress found herself thinking about the elderly man from the day before. His soft voice, his careful handwriting, the way he noticed everything. Those small details kept replaying in her mind. She wondered if he would return. She didn't know why she hoped for that, but something about him had left an impression she couldn't shake. The note he left on the table was folded neatly inside her pocket, almost like a tiny reminder that kindness mattered even when no one else noticed. As the morning rush ended and the restaurant grew quiet again, she looked toward the entrance a few times, half expecting him to walk through the door. But hours passed and he didn't show up. She told herself he was probably traveling or had moved on to another part of the city. Still, she felt a strange sense of disappointment she didn't fully understand. Around noon, the restaurant had a mix of customers. Families, a few office workers, and a couple sitting by the window. Not long after she finished helping one table, the door swung open, and in walked the elderly man. He was wearing the same neat suit, carrying the same leather notebook, and wearing the same gentle smile. She felt a small spark of surprise and relief. He bowed as soon as he saw her, as if greeting an old friend. She returned the bow, unable to hide the smile that formed naturally on her face. The manager raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The elderly man took the same seat as yesterday, placing his notebook on the table. When she walked over, he opened the notebook to a blank page and tapped his pen lightly, as if ready to continue the thoughts he'd begun the day before. He asked if he could have the same meal, and she nodded, writing down the order. But she noticed his handwriting on the earlier pages. He had written much more since yesterday, filling the margins with small symbols and sketches. She didn't know what they meant, but they looked important. As she went to the kitchen to place his order, she heard the manager mutter something about strange regulars. She ignored the comment, deciding not to let it bother her. The elderly man didn't deserve to be judged like that, especially when he was polite and caused no trouble. While the food was being prepared, the waitress noticed a new customer entering the restaurant. He walked in with a loud voice, talking into his phone and complaining about everything, from the traffic outside to the weather to the restaurant's lighting. He seemed irritated with the world. He didn't bother to greet anyone and took a seat directly behind the elderly man, slamming his chair backward a bit too forcefully. The waitress approached him with her usual polite tone, asking what he would like to order. He waved his hand without looking at her, still talking on the phone. She waited patiently, trying not to feel frustrated. When he finally hung up, he didn't apologize. Instead, he snapped his fingers at her and ordered something with an annoyed look. She wrote it down calmly and walked away, but she felt uneasy. She knew customers like him often caused problems, usually at the worst possible moments. She took a deep breath and reminded herself to stay patient. As she passed by the elderly man's table, he looked up from his notebook, sensing the tension. He didn't say anything, but his eyes showed concern. She smiled softly to reassure him, though she wasn't sure she convinced him or herself. A few minutes later, the rude customer started complaining loudly about the temperature of his drink. He claimed it wasn't hot enough, even though steam was rising from it. The waitress apologized politely and offered to replace it, but he continued raising his voice, attracting the attention of other customers. The elderly man glanced over his shoulder, noticing the uncomfortable scene. His expression stayed calm, but his focus sharpened. He seemed to be observing how the staff responded, especially the waitress. She took the drink back to the kitchen and returned with a fresh one. The man grunted, barely acknowledging her. She didn't let his attitude affect her, but deep inside, the moment stung a little. Just as she turned away, the rude customer suddenly pushed his chair back carelessly, hitting the elderly man's chair. The elderly man jerked slightly from the impact. His notebook nearly fell from the table, and he grabbed it quickly, looking startled. The rude customer didn't apologize. Instead, he complained that the tables were too close together. Then, noticing the elderly man's confused expression, he sighed loudly and said, "Do you even understand English?" The words were sharp, dismissive, and soaked in irritation. The elderly man bowed politely in response, trying to avoid conflict. He began speaking softly in Japanese, clearly apologizing though he had done nothing wrong. But the rude customer rolled his eyes. "Great," he muttered. "Someone who can't even talk properly." Before the elderly man could react, the waitress stepped forward, her voice firm but controlled. She stood between them, facing the rude customer. She wasn't angry, but her eyes were steady, and her tone carried quiet strength. "Please speak respectfully," she said. "He didn't do anything wrong." The rude customer looked surprised, then annoyed. "I'm the one sitting here. He bumped into me." She kept her voice even. "Actually, your chair hit his, and he apologized anyway." A few customers nearby turned to watch. The room grew a little tense. The manager noticed the commotion and hurried over, but the waitress stepped aside only after making sure the elderly man was okay. He held his notebook close, his hands slightly trembling, though he tried to hide it. The manager apologized to the rude customer quickly, trying to calm him down. He then shot a warning look at the waitress, silently telling her she had overstepped. But she didn't regret defending the elderly man. She couldn't stand by while someone treated him unfairly. The rude customer eventually quieted down, muttering under his breath. The manager walked away, trying to pretend everything was fine. But the atmosphere had changed. The staff moved more quietly, the customers watched carefully, and the elderly man sat still, his expression thoughtful. After a few minutes, the waitress returned to check on him. He looked up with a gentle smile, though she could still see the hurt behind it. He placed a hand over his notebook and bowed in gratitude. She apologized softly for the trouble, but he shook his head, letting her know she had done more good than she realized. In slow Japanese, he told her that kindness wasn't always loud. It was often shown in moments when no one expected it. Those simple words reached her deeply. No customer had ever said something like that before. She felt a warmth in her chest, a reminder that her small actions still mattered. She refilled his tea, her hands steady despite the tension in the room. He drank slowly, calming himself. Meanwhile, the rude customer finished his meal and left without a word. The room felt lighter as soon as the door closed behind him. When things finally settled, the elderly man opened his notebook again. But this time he didn't write immediately. Instead, he turned the pages thoughtfully, as if reviewing his notes from the previous day. Then he wrote slowly, carefully, each stroke deliberate and meaningful. The waitress wondered what he might be writing about. Maybe he was documenting the incident. Maybe he was writing about her. She didn't know and she didn't dare ask. But she sensed that whatever he wrote, it wasn't something trivial. When the afternoon quiet returned, the elderly man gently closed his notebook and looked around the restaurant again, observing everything with deep attention. He seemed to be studying the place as if it were part of a larger story, one he was slowly uncovering. She felt that same strange sense from the day before, as if he was not just a traveler passing through. There was purpose in his eyes, something hidden beneath his calm surface. But she had no idea that what happened today would be remembered by him far more than she realized, because this small moment of courage would soon become the turning point that changed everything. The next morning came with a strange mix of tension and hope inside the small restaurant. The staff arrived early, still whispering about the unusual man from the night before. Some wondered if he was a tourist who got lost. Others thought he might be some type of investor. And a few simply assumed he was someone lonely who wanted to feel noticed. No one had guessed the truth. Not even close. The waitress who had helped him the night before walked in with sleepy eyes but an alert mind. She replayed every moment from their conversation, especially the part where he had paused after hearing her voice. She wondered why he reacted like that. She wondered why he had looked at her as if he knew something she didn't. But no matter how many times she went over it, she found no answers. As she tied her apron and moved toward the counter, the door chimed softly. Everyone turned, expecting a regular customer. Instead, they saw two men in dark suits step inside. They didn't look like police, and they didn't look like customers either. Their straight posture and serious expressions brought the restaurant into complete silence. One of them glanced around the room, as if checking for someone specific. The manager quickly hurried forward, wiping his hands on his shirt. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound calm. "How can we help you?" One of the suited men bowed his head slightly, then spoke in a firm but polite tone. "We are looking for the young woman who worked here last night." The staff exchanged glances. The waitress felt her stomach drop. She stepped forward slowly, unsure whether she was doing the right thing. "I was working last night," she said. "Is something wrong?" Both men looked at her with sudden recognition. One of them nodded. "Yes, you are the one. Please." He motioned toward the door, but didn't move. He didn't want to force her. He only wanted her attention. She took a step back instinctively. "Can you tell me why you're here?" The taller man exchanged a glance with his partner before answering. "Our employer visited this place yesterday. We are here on his behalf." She froze. Everyone knew exactly who they meant. The quiet man, the one who barely spoke English, the one she had translated for. Her hands began to tremble slightly, though she tried to hide it. "Is he okay?" she asked softly. "Did something happen?" "No," the man replied. "But he wants to see you." The room went silent again. The staff didn't dare move or breathe too loudly. The waitress felt a strange mix of fear and confusion swirl inside her. "Why does he want to see me?" she asked. Before either man could answer, the door chimed again. This time, the person who walked in was familiar. It was him, the same man who had sat at table 7 the previous night. But now everything looked different about him. He was dressed in a clean dark coat, sharper and more formal than before. His hair was neatly brushed, his steps confident, and the quiet sadness from yesterday had been replaced by something steady and powerful. The entire atmosphere changed the moment he stepped inside. Even though he still barely spoke English, every person in the room could feel the sense of authority he carried. The waitress felt her heart skip. She wasn't scared, but she was overwhelmed in a way she couldn't describe. She gave him a small, polite smile. "Good morning," she said gently. He smiled back, and this time the smile felt warm and sincere. He bowed slightly, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black device. The bodyguard stepped forward instantly, as if ready to help, but he signaled them to wait. He pressed a button, and a soft voice in English came from the device. "Thank you for helping me yesterday." The waitress's eyes widened. She had never seen a device like that before, though she guessed it was a translator. She nodded. "You're welcome," she said softly. "I was just doing my job." The device translated her words instantly. He listened, then nodded again with a grateful expression. He tapped the device once more, and a new message came through. "My English is poor. You were kind to me. You did not ignore me. You listened." She felt herself smiling without meaning to. His tone, even through the translator, felt honest. "Anyone would help," she replied. He shook his head firmly before the device translated. "Not everyone." There was a pause that made the entire restaurant hold its breath. Then he motioned toward the door. The bodyguard stepped aside, leaving a clear path. Through the window, the waitress noticed a black car parked outside. It was shiny, large, and clearly expensive. The manager stepped forward suddenly. "Sir," he said nervously, "she can go, but is everything okay? We don't want any trouble." The man listened to his words through the translator device. Then he looked straight into the manager's eyes and gave a polite bow. The device translated, "There will be no trouble. Only thanks." That was enough assurance for the manager, though he still didn't fully understand what was happening. The waitress took a shaky breath and moved toward the man. "Where are we going?" she asked. The device replied, "To show you the truth." The truth. That word sent chills across her skin. She didn't know what he meant, but something inside her told her to trust him. Not because of the bodyguards, not because of the car, but because of the look he had given her the night before, the look of someone carrying a story he couldn't tell. She followed him outside. The cold morning air brushed against her face. One bodyguard opened the car door for her, and she stepped inside cautiously. The man sat across from her, with the device resting in his hand like a bridge between two worlds. The car began to move. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city passed by outside the window, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts were too loud. Her heart beat faster with every passing second. Then he pressed the device again. "Do you know who I am?" it asked in English. She shook her head slowly. "No," she answered. "Should I?" He watched her face closely before pressing the device again. "I am not what I seemed yesterday." She felt a nervous laugh escape her. "I figured that much." He smiled again, but this time it carried a hint of sadness. She didn't understand why. He held the translator again. "I did not come to this country for business. I came for something personal." This sentence made her pay attention even more. She leaned slightly forward, her voice gentle. "Something personal? Like what?" He looked out the window for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Then his fingers pressed the device again. "I came to find someone." Another chill ran through her. "Who?" she whispered. He met her eyes again, and this time she saw something she hadn't seen before. Pain mixed with hope. "My daughter." Her breath caught. She instinctively placed a hand over her chest. "Your daughter?" Here. He nodded slowly, the device repeating his confirmation. The air in the car felt heavier, full of emotion and unspoken stories. "Why here?" she asked. "Why this place?" He took a deeper breath before pressing the device again. "She was taken from me many years ago." The waitress felt her throat tighten. "Taken? What do you mean?" His eyes lowered to his hands, which were clasped tightly together. The device spoke after a moment. "Her mother left with her. I spent years searching. I finally found a clue that she might be living somewhere in this city." The car fell silent again. She didn't know what to say. This man, who had appeared so small and lost the night before, was carrying a heartbreak bigger than she could imagine. She swallowed hard. I'm so sorry," she whispered. He nodded gratefully. Then he pointed the device at her once again. "You remind me of her." Her breath hitched. "Of your daughter?" "Yes," the device answered. "Your kindness, your voice, your calmness." She didn't know what to say to that. Her hands felt cold, but her heart felt warm with something she couldn't name. The car slowed as it reached a tall building in the quieter part of the city. The bodyguard stepped out first, making sure the area was safe. Then one opened the door for her. "We're here," she said softly, though she didn't know what here meant. The man stepped out of the car and waited for her with patient eyes. She followed him into the building, up the elevator, and through a long hallway. Her heart beat so loudly she thought the whole building could hear it. Finally, he stopped in front of a door. He looked at her, almost as if asking a question without using words. Then he lifted the translator. "Behind this door," it said in a quiet voice, "is the truth you helped me reach." The hallway was silent in a way that made every small sound feel louder than it should. The waitress stood beside the man, unsure of what she was about to witness, unsure of why she, out of everyone, had been brought here. She wasn't family. She wasn't a friend. She wasn't even someone he had known for more than a few hours. But something about the way he looked at her told her that her presence mattered in a way she didn't yet understand. The man stood still in front of the door, his hand hovering just above the handle. His expression carried the weight of years, years of searching, hoping, wondering, hurting. He wasn't trembling, but she could feel his anxiety through the quiet. He lifted the small translator device and pressed the button. "You may stay behind me," it said softly. "I don't know who will open the door." She nodded, feeling her heart race faster. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't step away now. Something inside her pushed her to stay. He stayed frozen for one more breath, then slowly knocked on the door. The sound echoed down the empty hallway. One knock, two knocks, no answer. He tried again. This time there was a shuffle inside. Footsteps approached. The waitress felt her breath catch in her throat. The sound of the lock turning felt louder than anything she had heard all morning. The door opened only a few inches at first, just enough for someone inside to peer out. A woman's face appeared, cautious, tired, unsure. She seemed to be in her late 40s or early 50s. Her eyes widened the moment she saw the man standing there. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, even though his eyes carried too much hurt to hide. The translator spoke. "Hello." The woman froze. She didn't answer. He pressed the device again. "I am looking for my daughter." The woman's hand tightened on the door. Her lips trembled, but she didn't open it any wider. Instead, she stepped partially into the narrow space, blocking the view of the apartment behind her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said in a low voice, but the waitress could hear the fear in her tone. Not fear of danger, fear of truth. The man bowed again, deeper. The translator repeated his words. "Please, I have been searching for many years." The woman's breath shook. She lowered her eyes. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. He pressed the device again, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Is she here?" The woman didn't answer at first. Her eyes stayed on the floor. For a long moment it seemed like she wasn't going to respond at all. Then, finally, she whispered, "She isn't home." The man didn't move. He waited, hoping for more. The woman looked up, her eyes swimming with guilt and something deeper. She swallowed. "She knows about you," she said softly. "She always has." The waitress felt a strange heaviness settle in her stomach. She didn't know why, but she could tell the woman wasn't lying. She was holding something painful under her words. The man pressed the translator again. "Where is she?" The woman hesitated, then stepped back slightly and opened the door wider. The apartment inside was small but tidy, filled with soft colors and simple decorations. On one of the shelves near the entrance sat several framed photos. The waitress's eyes drifted toward them. What she saw made her breath stop. A picture of a younger girl, bright eyes, long dark hair, smiling with a quiet kind of joy. She looked almost like her. Not exactly, but similar enough that the connection felt real. The woman followed the waitress's gaze and closed her eyes, letting out a tired sigh. "She used to ask about him. All the time," she whispered. "But I didn't know how to tell her the truth. I didn't know how to explain what happened." The man stepped forward slightly, his eyes locked on the photos. The pain on his face was nearly enough to break the waitress's heart. He pressed the device again. "Where is she now?" the translator asked. The woman rubbed her hands together, then finally said, "She's at work." He waited for more. The woman stepped back and retrieved a small card from the shelf. She handed it to him with shaking hands. "She works at a care center not far from here," she said. "She helps elderly people. She's good at it. She always cared deeply about others." The waitress couldn't help but glance at the man when she heard that, because that description reminded her of him. His quiet gentleness, the way he had thanked her, the way he had looked at people with care rather than judgment. The man accepted the card and bowed deeply, so deeply it almost touched the floor. It was a bow filled with years of longing and years of regret. The woman's eyes softened at the sight. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have told her more." He didn't blame her. The translator spoke his words with quiet grace. "Thank you for taking care of her." The woman nodded, unable to speak. Her eyes glistened with emotion. The man slowly turned, motioning to the waitress to follow him. As they walked back down the hallway, the woman leaned against the doorframe, watching with a look of deep sadness and hope all at once. When they reached the elevator, the man pressed the translator once more. "Please come with me," it said gently. She nodded without hesitation. The car ride to the care center was filled with silence. Not tense silence, but heavy silence, the kind that happens when two people carry the same weight in different ways. The waitress stared out the window, trying to understand how she had gone from a simple shift at work to being part of a story that was breaking someone's heart and stitching it back together at the same time. She looked at him. His fingers were gripping the card with the address. His face was calm, but she could tell his emotions were close to the surface. "You're brave," she said quietly, her voice gentle. He didn't understand the words, but the tone was enough. He gave a small nod. When they reached the care center, the building looked warm and welcoming, with white walls and flowers near the entrance. People walked in and out, some in uniforms, some older and moving slowly with canes or walkers. The man stepped out of the car slowly, almost as if he couldn't believe he was finally here. The waitress walked beside him, offering quiet support with her presence. They entered the building, and the receptionist at the desk smiled warmly. "Good afternoon," she said. "How can I help you?" The waitress took a breath and stepped forward. "We're looking for someone," she said softly. "She works here." She gave the name written on the card. The receptionist nodded. "Ah yes, she's in the garden area. She helps with outdoor activities today." The man's breath tightened just enough for the waitress to notice. They followed the signs down a hallway filled with paintings and soft music. When they reached the glass doors leading to the garden, the waitress saw several elderly people sitting in wheelchairs or on benches, enjoying the sun. And there, near a wooden table, was the young woman from the photos. She was helping an old lady water a row of flowers. Her voice was calm, her smile soft, her movements gentle. The man stopped walking. The waitress felt her heart thump at the sight. The resemblance was even stronger in person. Something in the way the young woman stood, the peaceful way she moved. The man took a long, shaky breath. Then the young woman lifted her head. Her eyes landed on him. She froze. It was a moment that felt like time itself stopped moving. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted slightly. She looked confused, surprised, curious, and something else the waitress couldn't fully read. The man lifted the translator device with trembling hands. He pressed the button. "I am your father." The young woman didn't move. She just stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. The old lady beside her looked at her with surprise. "Dear, did you hear that?" she whispered. The young woman didn't answer. She took a slow step forward, then another, her eyes never leaving his face. "You're," she whispered. "You're him." The waitress felt her eyes grow warm. This was too real, too raw, too human. The man nodded slowly, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. The young woman reached out a trembling hand. He reached out too. When their hands touched, both let out a breath they didn't know they were holding. A soft sob escaped the young woman's lips. The man bowed his head, his shoulders shaking quietly. The waitress looked away for a moment, giving them the space they deserved. The staff in the garden watched silently, as if sensing the importance of the moment without understanding the details. After a long time, the young woman hugged him, carefully at first, then tightly, like she was clinging to a missing piece of her life that had finally returned. The man hugged her back with a tenderness that made even the sun feel warmer. When they finally pulled apart, the young woman wiped her eyes and smiled through her tears. "I never thought I'd meet you," she whispered. The translator slowly repeated the man's words. "I never stopped looking." They sat together on a bench, talking through the device, sharing stories, filling the empty years with pieces of truth. The waitress stayed a short distance away, watching with a soft smile. She didn't want to intrude, but she felt honored to witness something so meaningful. After some time, the young woman turned to the waitress. "Thank you," she said, her eyes full of gratitude. "You helped him find me." The waitress shook her head humbly. "I only translated," she said softly. "No," the young woman replied. "You cared." The man nodded in agreement. The translator repeated his words. "You changed everything." The waitress felt her chest warm with emotion. She hadn't expected any of this. She had only wanted to help someone who needed it. But life had a strange way of giving small actions enormous meaning. As the sun began to set behind the care center, the three of them sat together, sharing quiet moments of peace, connection, and new beginnings. And the waitress realized something she would remember for the rest of her life. Sometimes, kindness doesn't just help someone. Sometimes it finds a missing piece of them and brings it home.